All right, that was a great discussion. Let's see what you guys think about each question. Number one, what is the point of 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird? Why do you think this is the point? Group one, first of all, thought that this poem was very hard to understand. And that's true. And their discussion concluded that this difficulty is part of the point. Some things in life are just hard to understand. But is that the only point? Let's take a closer look. 1. Among 20 snowy mountains, the only moving thing was the eye of the blackbird. So we have an image. It's a huge landscape, 20 snowy mountains. It's like the dead of winter. Nothing is moving. But you're wrong. There is one thing moving, a very tiny thing, the eye of the blackbird. Number 2, I was of 3 minds, which means I couldn't make up my mind. There were like 3 alternatives. Like a tree in which there are 3 blackbirds. If you look at this tree, which bird are you focusing on? You have to choose. Number 3, the blackbird whirled in the autumn winds. It was a small part of the pantomime. A pantomime is a silent show. So you see the autumn winds. Maybe you don't hear them. But in fact, it's not just about the autumn wind. There is a bigger image or a bigger picture of the natural scenery here. That's not just the wind. That's not just the bird. It was only a small part. So we start to see here, it's not just about it's hard to understand, but even when you do understand each section, it seems to be telling you that you're not seeing the whole picture, that you're not certain about what's going on. Number 4, a man and a woman are one. Here that means they are the same. A man and a woman and a blackbird are one. So already in the first half, how are a man and a woman the same? We're often used to thinking of men and women as different. But this section seems to be saying, if you can think of men and women as the same, then you can also think of men and women and blackbirds as the same. If you can overcome the difficulty of the first one, then you can overcome the difficulty of the second one. So especially from section 4, we start to see that this poem could also be about limitations, blind spots, things that are hard for us to notice or hard for us to understand. And for these kinds of things, maybe you have to look at them from many different ways. So when it says looking at a blackbird, it doesn't always have to be physically using your eyes looking. Often it could be mentally looking, using your mind to try to understand the situation. So group 1 gave the answer that the point of this poem is human limitation and blind spots. And that for each section, the blackbird shows us where our blind spots are. So, for example, in stanza 9, when the blackbird flew out of sight, it marked the edge of one of many circles. So first of all, this section doesn't even have a blackbird. It has flown out of sight. We can no longer see the blackbird. But the moment it disappears, that is the very edge of the widest possible circle. It marks the difference, the separation between a place where we can see the blackbird and a place where we cannot see the blackbird. So section 9 is specifically about our limitations and our blind spots. And it is exactly where the blackbird disappears that marks the edge of our ability to see and to understand. And as the third line here says, it is only one of many circles. It's not just where the blackbird disappears. That's just an example. There are many other places and many other things that we have a hard time seeing and have a hard time understanding. That seems to be the main point of this poem. And then like stanza 13 is a very interesting conclusion. It was evening all afternoon, which means that for the whole afternoon, it was dark and gloomy. It felt like evening. It was snowing and it was going to snow, which means it was going to keep on snowing and snowing and snowing and snowing. The blackbird sat in the cedar limbs, sitting like in the limbs of a tall pine tree. 针叶林里面. So whether it is afternoon or evening, whether it was snowing or will be snowing, the blackbird is always there. No matter what time, no matter what's going to happen, humans always have to face their blind spots. We always have to face things that we may not be able to see or may not be able to understand. Okay, thoughts or questions about this poem? Okay, let's move on to the next one. Question 2, why is the wilderness no longer wild? What does the jar do? So let's take a look at this. Very short poem, 3 stanzas. I placed a jar in Tennessee, and round it was upon a hill. It made the slovenly wilderness surround that hill. The wilderness rose up to it and sprawled around, no longer wild. So that's our question, right? Why is it no longer wild? It has to do with the jar. It has to be related to the jar in some way. That's the only thing that happens in this poem, right? Somebody puts a jar there, and suddenly the wilderness is no longer wild. And group 2 gave an answer for this. They think this is because when you add something clearly man-made to the wilderness, then that picture, that image is no longer wild. It is now an image of a jar surrounded by plants. It is no longer the wilderness. And the jar is chosen because it looks so not wild. As group 2 said, it looks very odd, very strange to find a jar in the wilderness. And the poem emphasizes how strange the jar looks in this environment. It describes it as tall and of a port in air. A port in air, this is talking about a skyport for airships. 空船的港埠. Have you guys ever seen an airship? No? Very strange, right? It's so unusual. That's how the poem describes this jar. And so because it was gray and bare, it looked so unnatural. Because it did not yield to bird or bush, no bird, no bush came from this jar. Because it is like nothing else in this area. That difference makes it take control of the situation. Let me give you an example. So let's say you're in this classroom, the bell has rung, class has started, but I'm not here yet. You're still a group of students sitting in a room waiting for class to start. Some of you might know each other and you're chatting. Some of you might know nobody and you're flipping through the handout or whatever, or going through your phone. When I walk in, everything changes, right? I'm not like you. I'm not a student. You guys maybe didn't know what was going to happen today. I knew perfectly well what was going to happen today. The difference between us changes the situation. One person in the wilderness of people changed the situation. Something like that. But in this case, it's not teacher and student, it is civilization and nature. Now, when Wallace Stevens was writing this poem, it was published in 1923, there were still places in the world where humans did not have an impact. You could literally find a wilderness and go there and see what nature was like without human impact or influence. That is no longer true today. Think of anywhere in the world, any location, and you can find traces of human influence. Maybe it's acid rain, 酸雨. Maybe it's microplastics, 微塑胶微粒. Maybe it's simply the changing temperatures because of global warming. But there's no longer a place on Earth that is pure nature. And this poem can help us see why and how that change came to be. Do you have other thoughts or questions about this one? Okay, let's move on to the next one. Question 3. Why is that damn red wheelbarrow so important? Okay, so it's a short poem. Let's read it together. The red wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rain water beside the white chickens. That's the end of the poem. It seems quite clear, right? There's a picture. Like there's a red wheelbarrow. It's wet. There are chickens. So why is the wheelbarrow so important? So group 3 first mentioned that the red wheelbarrow here is the only thing that is a tool. It's important for humans. And then they noted the color. The red seems to be emphasizing the importance of this red wheelbarrow. And there's another color in this poem. The chickens, they're white. So the color here also seems to make the chickens more important. In fact, if we don't have the chickens, so much depends upon the red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater. Okay, cool. Where are we? What does this picture look like? We don't really know. You need the chickens to help you complete this picture. And so uh, the color added to the chickens suggests that the chickens are important, and it's a different color to show that they are not the same thing as the wheelbarrow. It's two different things put together that create this picture. And in fact, we see a similar logic with stanza 3. It's not just a wet wheelbarrow, it is glazed with rainwater. This describes what the wheelbarrow looks like when it is wet. It is covered by a layer of water. So again, it's not just saying, oh, look, a wheelbarrow. It's showing you the image, what you see when you read this poem. So why is the wheelbarrow so important? Without that wheelbarrow, you don't have a clear image. Without the wheelbarrow, you also don't have the rainwater layer on top of it. At most, you have a group of chickens. But even the color of the chickens is no longer that obvious when you don't have a red wheelbarrow to compare it with. It's just a group of chickens. And it doesn't say that the chickens are wet, so maybe you don't even know that it was raining earlier. It is the fact that there is a red wheelbarrow in this picture that makes it a picture. We can even look at the grammar. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. If you take out stanza 2, this is no longer a complete sentence. So much depends upon glazed with rainwater doesn't make sense. So even in terms of grammar, the red wheelbarrow is very important here. Finally, you can also look at the arrangement of the words. It's 4 stanzas, but each stanza has 2 lines. So if you take out this line, or if you take out the wheelbarrow, not only do you not have an object, you also don't have a line here. You're taking out a whole line from the poem. So even as a work of literature, like a poem arranged on the page, if you don't have this red wheelbarrow, you don't have a complete poem. So the object of the red wheelbarrow is important, but the image of the red wheelbarrow, the language used to describe this red wheelbarrow, is also very important for this poem. Thoughts or questions? So, when you read things, sometimes you read a description and you get a clear picture in your mind. When we read this poem closely, we can figure out why a good description can give you a clear picture. What is the kind of relationship between the elements in this kind of literature? All right, question 4. How do the speaker and the addressee feel about this situation? This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox. An icebox is a refrigerator with no power. There's just ice and it's a box. And which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. So the first question is, how does the speaker feel? And group 4 says, you know what? He says, forgive me, or sorry, the speaker says, forgive me, but maybe they don't really feel guilty. Because right after saying, forgive me, they describe how delicious they tasted. These plums that the addressee can no longer eat. So maybe the speaker recognizes that they should apologize, but they don't really feel very, very guilty, very sorry. But they leave this note, it looks like, to the addressee, which means the speaker safely assumes that the addressee will not get angry when they read this note explaining why the plums are gone. So the speaker and the addressee seem to be in a kind of close relationship. Could be close friends, could be partners. They understand each other well enough so that the speaker knows the addressee won't get too mad. Maybe they'd get a little annoyed. And the addressee is not too surprised that the speaker has eaten the plums. It's not unexpected. It's something that the speaker, maybe the speaker enjoys plums a lot and the addressee knows this too. So the fact that this is not a very sincere apology gives us a picture of this relationship of these two people. And in fact, this kind of joking apology could work better than a sincere apology in this kind of relationship. Imagine somebody that you are close with, maybe a close friend, a brother or sister, your boyfriend, girlfriend. Imagine this person. Imagine them one day coming to you and giving you a very serious apology. Kind of scary, right? You don't know what they're going to say. What is so serious that you have to like do such a heartfelt, deep kind of apology? If then they say, like if they say, I'm really sorry, I'm so sorry, I ate your snack. That doesn't feel proportionate. 感觉失衡比例, right? It's a small thing, but a serious apology. It seems to say that they have a different understanding of your relationship than you do. To you, you guys are so close that this small mistake does not need a huge apology. But to them, your relationship is so fragile that any small thing could damage this relationship. That's why they are giving you this sincere apology. So the fact that this apology is not very sincere tells us that these two people have a close and strong relationship. Does that make sense? And so, like, if they do have this relationship and the speaker did give a serious apology, it would actually hurt the relationship more than this kind of joke. Okay, thoughts or questions about this one? If you like to read English poetry online on social media, you might run across a version of this poem. People online love to use this poem when they give an ironic, joking apology. Like saying sorry for something that they're not really sorry about. Okay, so last question. Compare the poetry by these two authors. How are they similar? How are they different? Okay, well, we've looked at 4 of the poems. The first 2 are by Wallace Stevens, and the second 2 are by William Carlos Williams. So if we think about Blackbird and Anecdote, according to Group 5, these poems are harder to understand. They use harder language. They prioritize some kind of idea, feels more abstract. But if you think about the Red Wheelbarrow, and this is just to say, these two poems have very specific, concrete imagery, a very clear picture. The language is easier to understand. And the ideas are not that obvious. As I'm sure you will agree after our discussion, there are ideas in these two poems, but they're not front and center. They're not like shaking you, asking you, what do I mean? If you want to figure out the ideas, you can, but you don't have to. They could just be a very simple, clear picture. Um, these are the differences that Group 5 found. Group 5 also found some similarities. Both poets are good at observation. They notice small details. They also pay attention to not just people and animals and life, but also to objects and scenery, right? The wheelbarrow, the plums, the snow, the jar, right? So their observation applies to everything in the image. So let's read the last poem and see if that also fits this comparison. WCW's Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. So last week I showed you the painting. I told you the story about how this painting is about how even when we talk about like great historical figures and myths, ordinary people are still leading ordinary lives, no matter what the gods and the heroes are doing. According to Bruegel, so that's the painting, when Icarus fell, it was spring. A farmer was plowing his field. The whole pageantry of the year was awake, tingling near the edge, tingling near the edge of the sea, concerned with itself, sweating in the sun that melted the wing's wax. Insignificantly off the coast, there was a splash quite unnoticed. This was Icarus drowning. So yes, just like the other two poems by this poet, there is a strong sense of imagery, very clear, concrete images. Spring, farmer, edge of the sea, sweating in the sun, and a splash. It's a very clear imagery. The language is not too hard. Um, but there is an idea here, and the idea is also expressed in the use of language and the arrangement of the words. You will notice there is no punctuation, 没有标点符号. The first word is a capital A, but then after that we have no marks related to grammar. Now, if you want to, you can separate the sentences according to grammar, but the poem doesn't. It seems to be putting everything together. If you remember the painting from last week, it is also a mix of everything. There's a farmer in the front, there's the sea, there's a city in the back, there's a ship over here. Everything is kind of put together without a clear separation, as if life is one big thing instead of many small things. The whole pageantry of the year was awake, tingling, so it's full of life. Near the edge of the sea, concerned with itself. So the nature of this life, the spring, is so busy being the spring. The plants and animals and the humans are so busy doing things related to spring that it doesn't notice when Icarus falls into the sea. Right? The farmer, the spring, the nature is only concerned with itself. And they are sweating in the same sun that melted the wing's wax. So yes, at the same time that Icarus is falling through the sky, all of this other stuff is happening that history has not recorded. So the imagery is clear, but we still have an idea. Group 5 did mention that this is unlike the other two poems that we read by WCW because this one is related to Greek mythology. The title itself already carries a lot of ideas. And then when we dig into the poem, we see even more ideas. So yeah, Group 5's answer does seem to make sense. Wallace Stevens is harder to understand and foregrounds the ideas, while WCW is easier to understand. The imagery is clear, and you kind of have to work to get at his ideas. They're not in the front, they're kind of in the back. Okay, do you have other thoughts about today's discussion? All right, so let me introduce next week. Next week, we're traveling back in time. We're going to the beginning of the 20th century to read a story by Jack London. Jack London is one of the most popular fiction writers of the early 20th century in the United States. His stories are often about um, tough men who go to Alaska or go into the wilderness to look for gold, to look for oil, to look for peace, peace of mind, to get away from society, about their lifestyles, how they live in nature, and their struggles against nature. Jack London also liked to write about dogs, and we do have a dog in this story. It's called to build a fire. This one. So this is one of his stories set in Alaska. We have a dude who is on his way walking between one place and another place. It's a very long distance, but he thinks it's fine. He knows how to survive in the cold weather. But before he leaves, he is warned that no, 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 this is cold. It's going to get really, really cold. But still he thinks, how cold can it get? And walking beside him is a dog. It's one of those dogs that looks like a wolf, but it's not really a wolf. It's more closer to humans. It's not his dog. It is a dog. But they're walking together. And from the title of the story, you can already kind of guess what it's going to be about, right? Cold weather, colder than he's prepared for. When you're cold, you need to build a fire. But Jack London likes to write about people struggling against nature and losing. So look, I'm going to spoil the ending for you. He doesn't build a fire. He fails. Um, but the story records how he fails, what he thinks, what he tries, his experiences as he fails to save himself. The idea that humans lose against nature, that the law of nature is rigid and unbending and doesn't really help humans, this idea is called naturalism, 自然主义. And it was very popular in the literature of that period, late 19th, early 20th centuries. The other thing to know about Jack London is his language. He uses relatively simple language, easy words, short sentences. So at first it feels like it goes by very fast. But by the time you reach the end of the story, things have happened, maybe faster than you were prepared for. So that's next week. Okay, so that's it for today. If you want a paper handout, please follow me to my office. See you next week.